Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Douglas MacKenzie and I will bring you tonight news from Scotland and around the world. I'm pleased to say that my guest tonight, who will discuss the topics in the news, is probably a well-kent face to most of you, Linda Fabiani, one of Scotland's most experienced politicians, or ex-politician, if one can ever be such a thing. Linda was elected to the first reconvened Scottish Parliament and served for almost a quarter of a century, the last 10 years as the elected MSP for East Kilbride. During that time, she served as a Minister for Europe, External Affairs and Culture. She also notably spent 5 years as Deputy Presiding Officer, in which capacity I hope she will not have to tell me to wheesht during tonight's broadcast. So welcome, Linda.
Hello.
Okay, we start the news tonight, as usual, with an update from Ukraine on this day 856 since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Russia is considering a possible downgrading of relations with the West due to the deeper involvement of the US and its allies in the Ukraine war, but no decision had yet been taken, the Kremlin said on Thursday. A downgrading of relations, or even breaking them off, would illustrate the gravity of the confrontation between Russia and the West over Ukraine after an escalation in tensions over the war in recent months. Relations were maintained even during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, when the Cold War is thought to have come closest to nuclear war. Ukraine's military said on Thursday its forces had forced Russian troops out of a district in the town of Chasiv Yar on the war's eastern front, seen as Moscow's next target in its slow advance through the area. Nazar Voloshin, a spokesperson for Ukraine's southern group of forces, told the Ukraine Foreign News Agency that Russian forces had moved out of Chasiv Yar's Canal district along the Seversky Donets Donbass Canal that runs through the town's eastern edge. However, a Russian report said Moscow's forces had destroyed a communications tower near the town and made further headway. It was not possible to independently verify either report. The Ukrainian president met the European Union's 27 leaders in Brussels to sign a security pact, 2 days after his country began formal membership talks to join the bloc, a historic step that was unthinkable before Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. Volodymyr Zelensky said the EU-Ukraine security agreement would enshrine the commitment of all 27 member states to provide Ukraine with extensive support, regardless of any internal institutional changes. President Zelensky also told EU leaders that Russia's spring offensive in Kharkiv showed that international pressure on the Kremlin was not enough. Thanks to the bravery of our people and the decisions of our partners, we stopped the Russian offensive, he said. But the new Russian offensive proved that the existing pressure on Russia for the war is not enough. The French far-right National Party, RN, will not allow Russia to absorb Ukraine if it comes to power. In legislative elections, party leader Jordan Bardella said Thursday. At the same time, RN's former parliamentary leader, Marine Le Pen, said she expected the party to win an absolute majority in France's general election, form a government. Le Pen has previously maintained friendly relations with the Russian President Vladimir Putin and has argued for closer ties with Moscow. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg said on Thursday the resilient military alliance could ride out any political changes in major powers ahead of crunch elections in the US and France. Linda, a lot of political news, shall we say, from Ukraine today. How do you see that and the way forward?
Well, there's a few things that, I've sort of picked up from that, Douglas. I'm not entirely sure what downgrading of relations actually means, Because for Vladimir Putin, he changes the goalposts all the time, as we know, on so many things. So, what does he actually mean by downgrading of relations? I'm not convinced that the West has downgraded relations with Vladimir Putin and his cronies to the extent that they perhaps should have a long time ago. The other thing that is bothering me is the amount of elections that are going on around the world and the effect that can have on Ukraine, and the current wish that most countries have to back Ukraine in this and not allow democracy to be overrun in the way that Vladimir Putin wishes to. So there is this security pact, which, as you said, says that regardless of institutional change, the 27 countries should still back Ukraine and be on side with Ukraine. But, no government can really hold a future government to what they do. So I am quite concerned that governmental changes in many places, and of course France is the one that's being looked at very strongly just now within Europe, you can't guarantee that things won't change. And then, of course, we have what's going on in the US, and no doubt you'll be talking about that later. That's something else that's been thrown up that could have a direct impact on Ukraine. So, President Zelensky must be a terribly, terribly worried man. And I was reading somewhere else that in the background he is also, having big discussions with his own people about how this conflict could potentially be ended, but still saying they will not concede any of their territory, which is completely understandable. So there's an awful lot going on there, and it is all politics at the moment. Meanwhile, in the background, there's still people being killed, hurt, made homeless, suffering. Uh, so it doesn't look like where we are, 850 days or something, I think you said. So we're more than 2 years down the line, and there doesn't seem to be any progress at all, really.
Indeed, I mean, we will come to both the French and the US elections later, but it's important to note that also today was not all politics. Shortly before we came on air, the Russians attacked a residential building in Dnipro
Oh,
with 5 people seriously injured, 1 dead, but they expect that they're going to be pulling more bodies out of the rubble. So, other than the things politically which are happening,
yeah.
have we dragged our feet too long in providing air defence to Ukraine? And are we
I
going the
don't
right
know.
way now?
It's easier to be on the outside looking in, and not being part of all these diplomatic discussions. We started off by talking about relations between the West and Russia and Vladimir Putin. I mean, I remember being so frustrated, a long time ago about the way that it looked like the UK government, for example, was kowtowing to the Russian oligarchs. For goodness sake, we ended up with one in the House of Lords. It's a nonsense.
Mhm.
So have the West been too slow? Yes, they certainly have, because there's been far too much of the old pals act among the elites of both countries, I think, for far too long. And it was allowed to happen. And then when there was the first invasion over the Crimea, there was really no action taken by the West at all about that. And then when there's a full scale invasion, they all act shocked. So yeah, I think feet have been dragged.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Turning to more conflict and the latest from Israel and Gaza. Israeli forces deepened their incursion into 2 northern and southern areas of the Gaza Strip today. Palestinian health officials said tank shelling in Rafah killed at least 11 people. The Israeli military confirmed that it is operating in Gaza City's Shalian neighborhood. First responders with Gaza Civil Defense said airstrikes hit 5 homes in Shalia, killing at least 3 people and injuring another 6. The IDF also said it had conducted several strikes in the northern Gaza Strip and said dozens of terrorists who were hiding in UNRWA schools and facilities were eliminated. Israeli authorities said that 68 people 19 sick or injured children, plus their companions, had been allowed out of the Gaza Strip and into Egypt in the first medical evacuation since early May, when the territory's sole travel crossing was shut down after Israel captured it. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the Director General of the World Health Organization (WHO), welcomed the evacuation of a number of patients out of Gaza, but said that more than 10,000 patients still need medical evacuations. Israeli soldiers have destroyed 11 homes and other structures in an isolated community in the occupied West Bank, leaving 50 people homeless amid a reported uptick in house demolitions and spiraling violence in the Palestinian territory. Israel's hardline finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, said the government would promote West Bank settlements and punitive measures against the Palestinian Authority in response to Palestinian moves against Israel on the international stage. Wasel Abu Youssef, a senior Palestinian official, rejected Smotrich's moves, saying it was aimed at pursuing a war of genocide against Palestinians. He said the settlements were illegal colonies that violate all international resolutions. Hundreds of ultra-Orthodox Jewish men blocked a major highway in central Israel for 2 hours to protest a recent Supreme Court decision ordering young religious men to enlist for military service. The amphibious assault ship USS Wasp entered the eastern Mediterranean Sea this week as the US positions warships to try to keep fighting between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon from escalating into a wider war in the Middle East. A group of prominent Israelis, including a former prime minister and an ex-head of the Mossad, the Foreign Intelligence Service, have added their voices to the growing domestic calls in the US for Congress to withdraw its invitation to Benjamin Netanyahu to address it next month, calling the move a terrible mistake. Israel's top Arab MP, Ahmad Tibi, said in an interview with Agence France-Presse that Arab citizens in Israel were hunted over support for Gaza. A trio of rights groups took the Dutch government back to court on Friday, arguing that a ban on supplying F-35 fighter jet parts to Israel is not being respected in practice. More than 625,000 children in Gaza have been out of school for longer than 8 months, according to UNRWA. The Palestine Red Crescent Society, PRCS, expressed its concern over the halting of 18 ambulances in the Gaza Strip due to fuel shortages. The PRCS said that 18 ambulances represent 36% of the PRCS's ambulance fleet capacity. So very little good news to come from Israel and Gaza. If you can say 40 people being evacuated, in terms of the numbers, is really nothing.
Nothing. No.
And there's been so much international pressure of various degrees of push, but and now even dissent within Israel with Benny Gantz, hardly a dove, leaving the war cabinet, and calls. But nothing seems to stop Netanyahu. What can be done, and what can be done to prevent it boiling over into Lebanon?
Well, I mean, this is the thing. And meanwhile, the stuff in the West Bank that's been going on since the start. I mean, to me, that just shows that there's a big motive by Netanyahu and his warriors. It's about taking over all of the land, and they are being really brutal in the West Bank, and they don't even hide it anymore. They're getting all their own way. So we do hear a lot of hard words, from the US, from Europe. A lot of hard words, but no real action. The UN, says a lot, but it never seems to be picked up by the nation states and pushing it forward. And I think the time is well overdue that Palestine be recognised as a state, recognised statehood, because then that changes the dynamics because you've got one state coming into another. So on one side with Israel, we've got all the threats and blackmail going on. Don't say this or we'll do that. And there just seems to be nothing to stop them. I had great hopes a while ago, Douglas, that internal resistance within Israel would perhaps make a big difference here. But we keep hearing more and more people against what's happening there. The latest one trying to stop Netanyahu, preaching his hate out with Israel in the US. But nothing seems to be changing. And I think it was at the WHO that said there's still 10,000 people that should be evacuated in the health grounds.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, practically everyone in Palestine is suffering health problems because of starvation, deprivation, terror, the trauma of war, and the concern now that that does expand, as you said, into Lebanon. And I think there was a comment from somebody in the Israeli cabinet that said they would reduce Lebanon back to biblical times. I mean, the rhetoric that is being used by the hawks in Israel is absolutely horrendous. We have the Supreme Court judgment, and now we have the Orthodox Jewish people up in arms. Oh, excuse the pun, up in arms, about being told they have to bear arms. Even that doesn't seem to be making much of a dent in that absolute callousness of the Israeli war government. I don't know. I just despair. I absolutely despair. I would like every leader in the West to be calling for an immediate ceasefire, putting real pressure on Israel, stopping all arms sales to Israel, and recognising Palestine as a state. And then Israel is, in a way, backed into a corner and isolated. I think that's the only thing that could really move things forward in any way at all now.
Thank you. Well, it's a strategy. Remains to be seen whether Western governments will move towards it.
Mm.
Moving to struggles of a different kind and the general election campaign today. Starting with the Conservatives. Rishi Sunak has spoken about the hurt and anger he felt when he heard a Reform UK activist using a racial slur about him in a broadcast interview. He said he was particularly upset about his daughters having to hear what was said, and he made a point of repeating the slur himself, the P word, because he said it was important to call it out for what it was. So, Linda, are we seeing first in this campaign sympathy for a Conservative?
Well, I don't know if it's sympathy for a Conservative, but certainly sympathy for the man and for his family. I think these comments were absolutely disgusting. No wonder the man's hurt. Of course he's hurt. And that kind of stuff is endemic across the country. It's a very small minority of people who have these beliefs and put them into words. But, you just have to speak to Hamza Yousaf in our own parliament, Anas Sarwar. They will tell you that they have suffered all that kind of stuff on social media as well. We know that, it's been reported. But the idea of people standing for election and standing on doorsteps and using that kind of language is extremely worrying. And I mean, I can only go by what I've heard in the news, and I heard that Nigel Farage is trying to downplay some of this stuff and say that this guy that was caught by Channel 4 was an actor. And he was, I think, trying in some way, although not saying it, to imply that the whole thing was a set-up and Channel 4 were behind it. Perhaps had hired the actor or whatever. It's absolutely disgusting. Nigel Farage has promoted this kind of rhetoric by the lies that he tells to back up his policies that in themselves are appalling. So I hope that there are people who perhaps were starting to have a bit of sympathy for Farage. And all this, oh, he's one of us, he talks sense and all the rest of it. We'll start to look at it now. There's his comments about Ukraine. Then there's the people that are backing him that he's trying to disown immediately. I hope they'll start to see this man in a different light. it would be wonderful if it meant enough that he didn't get elected in Clacton, because I really don't want to see him sitting in any parliament, let alone one that unfortunately represents us. So, yeah, I feel sorry for Sunak the man. I think it's terrible that these kind of things are said. So, yeah.
Yes, horrible scenes. Moving on to Labour's activities today. Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, held a rally with the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar this morning. They were promoting Labour's New Deal for working people. The SNP's Marion Fellows has challenged Labour to say if they will be raising the pension age after an interview with Radio 5 this morning, where Sir Keir Starmer said that a Labour government would scrap the 25% tax-free pension lump sum. Labour later corrected the statement to say that it has no plans to stop people taking 25% of pension as tax-free lump sum. Well, Linda, not for the first time, a very confusing statement from Sir Keir Starmer. Is it going to be an issue?
They're absolutely all over the place. A few things in this. Every time I see Anna Sarwar up in his hind legs with Angela Rayner or with Keir Starmer or MD else talking about a new deal for working people and all the rest of it, I actually get angry. I can feel my blood boiling because I sat in the Smith Commission along with John Swinney and others, and we were pushing for employment rights to come to Scotland so that Scotland could lead the way in the UK and make a difference. And Sarwar and the rest of them knocked it back all the time. No way was this happening. We raised it in the Scottish Parliament over and over again. You know, please join us in fighting for the devolution of employment rights. Even the STUC want devolution of employment rights to Scotland. And the Labour Party in Scotland, should I say the UK Labour Party in Scotland, have always knocked that back. And then they have the nerve to stand up there and say, we're protecting workers' rights. We will do this, we will do that. And it just makes me so very angry. As far as the pensions and stuff are concerned, Marion Fellows has done a great job all round on that. But it's just a constant thing with Keir Starmer where something gets announced and then he backtracks and then he changes it or he U-turns. Nobody really knows at all what Labour stands for anymore. To me, they don't stand for anything other than getting themselves elected. And I think if it happens, people will get a real shock because they'll recognise that actually they don't really know what they're doing and will just carry on with things as normal while they scrabble about trying to work things out to get them a good headline. And I think it's very, very sad that I don't see a Labour Party that's standing on any principles. I just see them standing to get power. And that's what's wrong with the UK now. You have two parties with not an awful lot of difference between them in terms of policy. One gets a shot and then the other gets a shot and nothing much changes. So
well, turning away from those
probably what I mean. That's why I believe in independence, apart from the very, very basic of our country should run its own affairs, make the decisions yourselves. Followed by they're making a right mess and we can do it better.
Well, turning to the activities of the SNP today, Edinburgh City Council has taken the unusual step of setting up an emergency centre where locals who have yet to receive their ballot can have one reissued or can even cast their vote ahead of 4th of July. Earlier in a radio interview, First Minister John Swinney said it was deeply unacceptable for people about to leave on holiday not to have their postal votes already. Mr. Swinney reminded the interviewer that he had warned of this possibility when the election was announced to take place during the Scottish school holidays. The SNP leader also said that politicians should not bet on elections. I don't think that people who are involved in politics should bet on the outcome of elections. We are, in an individual sense, we have knowledge that we acquire as we go around election campaigning that obviously can inform our judgments better than most other people who won't perhaps know what is going on. I think there's an analogy to be made here with footballing, where footballers are not allowed to bet on games with which they are involved, and I think the same should apply to politics. The SNP have said the Independent Institute for Fiscal Studies have today written down in black and white what they have been warning of for months, that the Labour Party are planning massive cuts to the Scottish budget and Scotland's public services. The IFS today confirmed that under both the Labour and Conservative parties' plans, the Scottish Government would see cuts in funding for investment and only modest increases in funding for day-to-day spending. Um, well, Linda, we'll come to the spending second. First of all, the gambling. Footballers get banned for very long periods if they're caught with their betting on matches. Should it be the same for politicians?
Yeah, I mean, I have a great deal of sympathy for that view by John Swinney. I think there's an ethical thing here. You know, I don't think politicians should have to be told these things. You know,
Yes.
morally, it's wrong. Ethically, it's wrong. And, you know, it's bad enough. Some wee backbencher, like I was doing it, you know, they shouldn't be doing it either. I think morally that's wrong. But see, when it comes to somebody that sits in the cabinet like Alistair Jack, you know, sitting in the UK cabinet alongside the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister who's the only one who can set the date of the election, and he thinks it's acceptable to bet on that. It just absolutely stuns me. And it is, to me, it's corrupt. And people who think that's okay shouldn't be in a position of trust, shouldn't be serving in a nation's parliament, never mind in their cabinet. It's absolutely appalling. So, yes, I have sympathy for the view that they should be absolutely banned, but I despair about the fact that that should be necessary. You know, and talking of elections, I'm very, very angry about this postal vote thing. South Lanarkshire Council, just before I came on, announced the same thing as Edinburgh, and they are opening tomorrow between 10 and 6 for people to go along. But I've had people on to me today after their post arrived and their postal vote wasn't there to say, look, I'm going to be on holiday later today. Some were saying they were leaving really early tomorrow to go on holiday. What are we supposed to do? These people are missing out on their democratic right to vote. And, you know, when Sunak set the election for the 4th of July, Scotland was ignored yet again. Absolutely no recognition that Scotland's school holidays start at the end of June and that loads of people head off for the first 2 weeks in July, which is the Edinburgh Fair, if I remember rightly, and many other places in Scotland. So it's just another mark of Scotland not mattering at all to Westminster. And there's people missing out on their vote, and there's people very angry about it. And I know it'll probably affect all parties, but that doesn't matter. It shouldn't be affecting anyone. So I don't know if they will suddenly decide to do some kind of emergency proxy thing or something. But there's people going to be abroad, going to be all over the place. No, I don't think there's a lot can save this. And it'd be interesting to see at the end of the day how many, the proportion of postal voters whose votes were returned as compared to other elections. Of course, balanced with turnout and everything else. There's some very smart people that will be able to work out that stuff. And it'll be interesting to see what the result of that is.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, the IFS, I haven't mentioned that. Yeah, we all know that Labour are planning cuts. The IFS has proven it. You know, they are the experts in this. And yes, it's like we were saying earlier, nothing's going to change quickly at all with a Starmer government.
Indeed, I don't think it'll come as a surprise to many people, the IFS opinion.
No.
We're back again at gambling, and today the Labour Party was accused of being compromised by donations from gambling companies. In February 2020, Sir Keir Starmer's office received a £25,000 donation towards his campaign to defeat Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader from Peter Coates, the head of the dynasty behind online gambling company Bet365. Coates and the Bet365 group had been regular donors to Labour until 2015 to the tune of £490,000, but the money dried up in the Corbyn years. The donation was a clear sign that the gambling industry spigot could easily be turned on again. Now, at the 12 most recent political donations by the industry and its executives, all have gone to Labour. A total of just under £400,000 stretching back to March 2020, according to Electoral Commission records. But that river of cash does not just indicate Labour's position as the likely winner of the 4th July general election, it also illustrates the deep-rooted ties between the Labour Party and the £11 billion a year gambling sector. In the past few weeks, revelations about bets apparently placed on the date of the election by Conservative politicians have prompted anger about an apparent problem with gambling infecting politics. The furore has overshadowed the fact that at the time the election was called, the Tory government was proceeding with its long-awaited white paper on gambling regulation. With the future of those plans likely to be left in the hands of a Labour government, there are question marks over whether it is Labour, rather than the Conservatives, that has a gambling problem. We've covered the ethics of politicians gambling on elections already, Linda. The way that politics is funded in this country, not unique to this country, is problematic in terms of buying influence. Happens other places too. Is there a way it can be controlled, supervised, improved?
Well, I think a lot of it comes back to ethics again, to be perfectly honest. We're beyond ethics mattering to the big UK parties, that's very clear. Gambling regulation. They've all been talking about gambling regulation for a long, long time, and nothing's ever been properly done about it. And, you know, the upsurge that we have in gambling on social media, internet gambling, TV gambling, you know, if you, I've actually given up watching television, but the last time I did watch it, when the programmes come to an end on commercial channels, you end up with these gambling phone-ins and everything, promoted by a lot of TV stars who hold themselves up as really decent people. So that's not been regulated properly as far as I'm concerned. Internet gambling. Even when I play silly wee childish games on my computer to pass the odd few minutes or so sometimes, you know, you keep getting adverts coming up saying you can win this, you can win that. And I think, oh my goodness, there must be people who are in some kind of desperate states who perhaps fall for that and think it will answer their problems. There are people who are already addicted to gambling who will automatically do these things. They have put limits here and there about how much can be spent, but it's not real regulation. So you then get on to the big issue that if you have a political party taking big donations from companies that promote this, you wonder why these companies are giving these donations. You wonder what the relationships are like from those donating to those accepting the donations. And one thing I hate above all else in politics is hypocrisy. And I do not like the hypocrisy of Keir Starmer and some others in the Labour Party who hold themselves up as the moral guardians of the nation so often. And then you find out this kind of stuff going on in the background. I thought it was quite interesting that it stopped when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader and then started again when he was seen off. So I do think Keir Starmer has a lot of questions to answer on that. Whether he ever will is a whole different thing. When they come into government, I think they should be pushed on continuing with gambling regulation. I don't think the Tories were particularly serious about really tackling it, I have to say. But it'll be interesting to see what Labour does and comparing it with the white paper that the Tories had produced.
Okay, thank you. Turning now to a Scottish company, Brewdog. Brewdog has been accused of sacking an Asian woman after she voiced her distress when members of the far-right English Defence League met in the London bar where she worked. The former staff member said members of the EDL had gathered unchallenged at the Punk Brewers flagship bar in Waterloo ahead of a rally to mark St George's Day on 23rd of April. Police went on to arrest 10 people at the event after groups of men tried to break through cordons in an area of Whitehall, while glass bottles were also thrown. The former Brewdog staff member said she had gone to see her manager in a podcast studio located in the bar after she arrived at work to find the suspected members of the EDL were drinking in the bar before the rally. Brewdog accused her of aggressive behaviour and use of inappropriate language after she raised her concerns. While the woman admitted swearing, she denied that she swore at or abused her manager. In a letter to the employee, Brewdog said it acknowledged her past trauma and emotional state, but that she had been guilty of serious misconduct worthy of dismissal with notice. The trade union Unite has raised concerns about Brewdog's action in the case and the company's treatment of staff. Well, Linda, this is very much a he said, she said story, so it's probably impossible to comment on the individual case. But what do you think of the situation where potentially I heard the lady say, "Imagine yourself being a brown woman in this situation."
Absolutely. Can I say to you, a few years ago, not all that many years ago, a few years ago, I had a young overseas friend who was studying at the University of Bradford, in fact. And I can't remember if it was EDL because they've gone through many incarnations, these racist groups. But anyway, they were having a rally and a march through Bradford. And my young friend contacted me, absolutely terrified that this was happening. And he lived in a chaplaincy, actually, with a lot of overseas students. And they all went down into the basement and hid when this march was going by, absolutely terrified. So that leads me on to the situation where you have people working in premises where participants in such marches and rallies are likely to congregate and come in. Now, that must be absolutely terrifying. And I do think that any employer has a duty of care to their staff. So, let's not talk particularly about Brewdog here, because as you say, it's a particular case. But if you have a public house, a premises, where you have staff whose background is Pakistan, India, Africa, somewhere that means the colour of your skin is not that which is said by the EDL and the rest of them to belong in this country, you have a duty of care to these staff members. And either you close the premises or you have detailed discussions about staffing on these particular days. And I know it's really difficult to say, why should somebody be kept away from their work or stop work just because these people are coming by? But you have to think about what could potentially happen. And the idea of coming into your work with no warning at all and finding that there's people there who don't think you have a right to be there is terrifying and disturbing. And I can understand why somebody would be very upset at that. And I think both the owners of the company and the particular managers that are around in any of these companies should have a duty of care, but should also not be surprised if they have staff members that are very upset by it. I also read that in this particular case, the police had said that the premises should stay open and that they would be around. So I don't know the background of that either or what actually happened. On the surface of it, I have great sympathy in this particular case for the employee. And I see that Unite the Union is backing her up. I suspect she was not alone in her fear, her discomfort in all of this.
Indeed, thank you. As I said, we would be looking at foreign elections. So in France, first of all, The far-right National Rally, RN, has strengthened in final polls, including one suggesting it could be on course for a historic parliamentary majority, as candidates fought for votes on the last day of campaigning before the first round ballot in France's most momentous election for decades. 2 days before Sunday's ballot, two polls on Friday showed Marine Le Pen's anti-immigration France First party pulling steadily further ahead in a race it had led since President Emmanuel Macron called the shock ballot almost 3 weeks ago after the defeat of his centrists in the European parliamentary election. Official campaigning for the first round vote ends at midnight on Friday, with no political activity allowed on Saturday. Campaigning resumes on Monday for a final 5 days before a decisive second round ballot on 7th of July, in which the party could take control of France's government for the first time. One poll for Les Echos newspaper showed RN could win 37% of the national vote, 2 points more than a week ago, while another for BFM TV estimated the far-right party was on course for 260 to 295 seats, potentially giving it an outright majority. The new Popular Front, NFP, a broad but fractious left-wing alliance dominated by the Unbowed France, LFI, of the veteran radical left firebrand Jean-Luc Mélenchon, was on 28%, and Macron's centrist bloc, known as Together, on 20%. Accurate seat forecasts are difficult because the outcome depends on second-round results in France's 577 constituencies, many of which could be three-way races and affected by tactical alliances and withdrawals aimed at blocking the far right. Analysts say the far-right party has benefited from public anger at Macron, whose pro-business reforms have spurred the economy, but who is seen by many voters as having ignored their concerns about the cost of living and worsening public services. His popularity has sunk so low, allies suggested he take a back seat in the campaign. Well, interesting comments about Macron with this was it was either a masterstroke that he will give the far right a chance to implement very poor financial policies prior to the presidential election and he will get back in again. And of course, the other view is that he gambled recklessly and is throwing France to the far right. Do you have a view on it?
Well, I have to say I am not up enough on the intricacies of French politics to really have a very considered view about this. However, the idea of Marine Le Pen and the others being in charge in France is extremely worrying. I know that the financial markets globally are all very worried about it. I'm not worried about them, I have to say.
Yeah.
I'm more worried about the social side of what these people stand for. Um, I know that it's really difficult to call because of this two-tier system, the double election thing that goes on in France, and only so many after the first round can go through to the next round. And I understand that a lot of people in France vote very tactically. So the results of the second round can be very different from what happened in the first round. And I seem to remember there was a time before where after the first round it looked like Marine Le Pen and her allies were going to have a landslide. But then in the second round it was very, very different. So that may happen again this time. The other thing that I get frustrated at, and this happens the Europe wide, is that the left, to call it that and give it that label, never seem to get their act together to work together. The right always seem to be able to, but the left never do. So I hope they waken up and recognise that they're really going to let their country go in a terrible direction unless they start cooperating amongst each other.
Thank you. Well, in addition to the British election and the French election, of course, there's another election on the horizon. A defiant Joe Biden has resisted calls to abandon his re-election effort and step aside for a younger candidate after his poor performance in Thursday's presidential debate with Donald Trump. Despite Democrats panicking and openly talking about replacing the president with another nominee, the Biden campaign has unequivocally ruled out that possibility. Of course he's not dropping out, Lauren Hitt, a campaign spokesman, said on Friday. Her statement followed Biden's own resolute comments to downcast supporters shortly after leaving the debate stage in Atlanta. "Let's keep going," he told them. Biden was also said to be planning to return to the debate stage as planned in September, CNN reported Friday morning, citing an advisor. That stubbornly upbeat posture is being maintained today as the president journeys to Raleigh, North Carolina for a post-debate election rally in one of the key battleground states seen as vital to who wins November's election. The positive facade, however, may be hard to maintain amid public concern about a debate performance that could only reinforce widespread voter anxiety about the president's advanced age and his physical and mental fitness to serve another 4 years in the White House. Frequently appearing abject and speaking in a raspy voice, Biden repeatedly mangled his policy statements as he became bogged down in detail and failed to score forcefully against his opponent in areas where Trump is vulnerable, such as abortion, Trump's criminal status as a convicted felon, and his role in the January 6th insurrection. With Democrats close to open mutiny and rumbling about discontent among fundraisers, sections of the media normally sympathetic to Biden also turned on him, with Thomas Friedman writing an article in the New York Times with the headline, "Joe Biden is a good man and a good president. He must bow out of the race." Biden's resistance to such entreaties may be bolstered by the public support he received from chief surrogates like Kamala Harris, the vice president, and Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, two figures who would be in the front line of potential replacement candidates in the immediate aftermath. Acknowledging the obvious, Harris conceded that Biden had a slow start, but insisted his finishing performance was strong. Probably quite unusual in political debate when his own supporters made a fairly feeble attempt to say, well, he had a cold and he came on to a good game in the second half, a bit like Scotland after being lumped by Germany. But by today, they all seem to have turned around and said, no, it was an unmitigated disaster. Can he survive his own party?
I mean, what a state the United States of America is in. My goodness. I didn't watch it. I didn't see it, but I heard all the reports and read about it, and it sounded absolutely awful. And on one hand, you've got somebody stuttering away and seeming to be not on top of the brief and the game at all. And the other one, you've got an inveterate liar and felon and an altogether nasty, horrible person. So I don't know if he can survive it. I mean, we've got the conventions coming up and stuff. Something may well happen there. What I'm disappointed in and have been for a few years is Kamala Harris. I mean, what happened to her? Where has she been? I mean, has she been stopped from having a role as vice president, or is she not up to it? Because that should be an obvious thing that everyone's talking about, but it doesn't appear to be. So I mean, if he gets elected, he'll be, what, 86, 87 by the time he's done? I don't know what the strategy has been. And then I wondered if maybe this has been deliberate, just let the old man go, let everybody realise that we need to replace him and they've got somebody wonderful waiting in the wings. Who the heck knows? Maybe I've been watching too much of the West Wing over the years. But,
Yes, who knows
it's
indeed.
harder.
Thanks, Linda. But in conventions, and I mean, it hasn't always been the coronation at conventions in the past that it is now. For
Yeah.
example, John F. Kennedy and General Eisenhower, and way back Franklin D. Roosevelt came out of conventions to become the candidate. So it may
Is that
happen.
right?
Okay,
Oh,
turning to
interesting.
Okay, turning to Scottish news, the Scottish Government is inviting people across Scotland to have a say on how crofting is reformed. A programme of meetings will take place from 3rd of July to 15th of August, stretching from Oban to Shetland. The consultation, which runs until 2nd of September 2024, seeks views on a range of proposals for crofting reform. These will help to create opportunities for new entrants, encourage the active management and use of crofts and common grazings, and support rural population. The crofting system must support effective and sustainable land use. The consultation seeks the public's view on proposals on entry to crofting, crofting communities, use of common grazings, strengthening residency and land use, enhancing crofting commission powers, and simplifying crofting. Jim Fairley said crofting's place in agriculture and food production will remain at the heart of the system, but alongside these, we now see crofting playing an increasing role in tourism, renewable energy generation, forestry, peatland restoration, beekeeping, and a small-scale horticulture production. Interesting, again, what was said there. Always good to see support for crofting coming from a rural area. Particularly interesting, the idea to bring people back into crofting, whereas I know so many people growing up who left it, left their parents'
Yeah.
crofts, never to return. And these ideas of tourism and beekeeping and
Yeah.
all these things,
I get,
renewable energy.
yeah. It does have to change. I mean, I'm certainly not a crofting expert. We don't have many crofts in East Kilbride.
These go right.
A few allotments, but that's about it. But I am aware that an awful lot of crofting is part time as well. So there's a lot of crofters who it does not sustain the family, so they have other jobs as well. I know that happens in a lot of the islands and other places. So I hope that the consultation will take some of that on board as well and recognise it. And it's all part of the bigger picture. It's all very well saying you're going to get people to come back to crofting, but you're not going to get people to come back if you're scraping a living as being a crofter. So there has to be other opportunities as well for people to take that on board, because it is a very historic part of our environment, a very useful part of our environment. And I like the idea of some of the diversification, likes of the beekeeping and all that kind of thing. So I'd like to be a fly in the wall actually at some of the meetings, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of varying views and all expressed quite forcibly. About the Crofting Commission as well, because I know things are not always plain sailing as far as the Crofting Commission's concerned and their membership. So interesting. And probably overdue.
Yeah, and these are open meetings, so people are free to attend to hear the views. Another Scottish story to finish, and pioneering international research led by the University of St Andrews into the significant role women have played in historical artistic work has been awarded a 1.5 million funding boost by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, AHRC, to explore archaeological and artistic masterpieces from the past and the women who created them. Led by Alison Beach, Professor of Medieval History from the School of History at the University of St Andrews, Word of Mouth, embodied stories of pre-modern women at work, will explore the role of women in the spiritual, intellectual, artistic, social and economic landscapes of medieval and early modern society. This pioneering work will push the boundaries within which archaeologists and historians can track the invisible workforce of the past. The international team of historians and archaeological scientists from University College Dublin and the Universities of Aberdeen and Turin in Italy will focus on the period between the 11th and 17th centuries and build on research which began with the discovery in 2019 of lapis lazuli pigment in the mouth of a religious woman buried in medieval Germany. Lapis lazuli was one of the rarest and most expensive artistic materials in the Middle Ages, with very few highly skilled artists entrusted with its use in decorating only the most valuable religious items. In 2019, as part of an international team working on health and diet in the Middle Ages at the medieval German monastery, international co-lead Dr. Anita Radini, now at University College Dublin, discovered pigment flecks in the mouth of a medieval nun who had lived between 997 and 1162 AD. Historical work by Professor Beach allowed the team to link the pigments to the gesture of painting, linking the discovery to manuscript illumination. The pigment is believed to have been lodged in the woman's teeth as she used her tongue to shape the end of a paintbrush. The extraordinary discovery indicated that women had played a more significant role in artistic work than had been reflected in historical records, and contributed to the growing volume of evidence which challenges exclusionary narratives about the nature and scope of medieval and pre-modern women's artistic and economic activities. Well, a good news story. I know, Linda, with your connection with Italy, isn't it nice that despite Brexit, there's still international
Yeah,
research cooperation going
yeah.
on?
Well, that's right, and it is going on. I mean, there is a concern that it's not as much as it would have been, and only time will tell in that. But yeah, I think I tried to read a lot about this project. Really interesting, because all too often women have been and their achievements have been written out of history. So it's good to see that this study is going on. But I'm fascinated to think what's lodged in our teeth. You know,
Yes.
there you go. I hate to think we'll find in mine 1,000 years down the line.
Indeed, it may happen to us in future. Yes. And on that note, that's it
My
for this
pencil.
evening. Thank you very much to Linda Fabiani. Despite
Thank you.
25 years in politics, still very interesting to listen to, and thank you for your contribution. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. Thank you again to Linda Fabiani. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.